Welcome to the session today. Before we begin the session, I would like to acknowledge that Legal Aid BC head office is situated on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I would also like to acknowledge that many of you are joining today from many places far and near and acknowledge the traditional territories and owners and caretakers of those lands. Welcome again. Thank you for joining the session today. Along with me in the session today is Sarah Chow and Alessia Mordini. I think you all know me. My name is Baljinder Gill. I'm the Community Training and Outreach Coordinator with Legal Aid BC, and my job is to arrange workshops, conferences, webinars, online trainings, and everything regarding to online education or in-person education in the province of BC. Sarah Chow is the Community Engagement Coordinator, and Alessia it also helps both of us in running these sessions. I'm always thankful to both of them for running these sessions behind the scenes and sometimes in front as well, because without them, I will not be able to run these sessions. Before we begin the session, I have few announcements. Your feedback is very important to us. Your feedback helps us to find out what kind of information you want in these sessions, how you want us to do these trainings. As we are out of COVID, you want to switch to in-person trainings, or how you want to learn more through the webinars. Please fill out the feedback at the end of this session. There is a prize associated with it, and the winner will get their prize via email, I think, end of the month when they will take out the draw. And also, during the session, all the questions and answers will be going in Q&A. Myself and Sarah Chow will be monitoring the questions and answers, as I will be going out of the meeting for a little bit at 11, and Sarah Chow will monitor in my absence. We have checked with our wonderful speaker today. She will prefer to answer all the questions towards the end, but if there is anything that she can address right away, she will try to do that. Today's session will talk more about the refugees claim process, how the application is, what goes in the application, and how the review process takes place. Prabh, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker now, Prabh Sangha. She's with Lehal Law Group. And she will be talking about the refugee claimant issues and everything in regard to that today. I will give a brief introduction to Prabh, as Prabh have helped me a lot in the past to doing the media shows. And she started her career not very long ago, but she have accomplished a lot. She was raised in Surrey and pursued an undergraduate degree at Simon Fraser University. Prabh earned her Juris Doctorate and Certificate in Dispute Resolution from Willamette University, located in Salem, Oregon. During law school, Prabh wrote for Willamette Law Online and summarized newly released decisions from the Oregon Supreme Court and Oregon Court of Appeal. As a new lawyer, not only is Prabh on the board of SABA BC, she has been appearing on the morning show on Channel Punjabi to share important information related to immigration law with all her viewers. Prabh is passionate and eager to accept new challenges and build her skill set. She has participated in a roundtable discussion with the Minister of Immigration, presented to the Consulate General of the Philippines, and assisted with the review of IRCC's proposal for the Municipal Nominee Program. She understands the migrant issues very well, as she herself is from an immigrant family. So please join hands with me to welcome Prabh today in today's session around refugee claims. Welcome, Prabh, and thank you for joining us today.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. Thank you to Legal Aid. And I'd also like to say I'm aware of a lot of the organizations that are here today. As lawyers or as advocates, we are kind of all part of the same group, and it's nice to see that we share the same values to assisting some of the most vulnerable people that come to this country. I'm born and raised in Canada. I'm fortunate, but some people aren't. My parents were actually from India. They encountered a lot of racism as well when they immigrated here, and it's I really enjoy helping immigrants from various countries, not only learning about the countries and different cultures, but also finding ways to give people an opportunity as well that my parents were given at one point to immigrate to Canada. And I'm trying to share a lot of information today about refugee claims. I know some organizations were hoping that we'd be discussing particular details about Ukraine and Afghanistan. Unfortunately, given the time, it's difficult to address all of those areas. So it might be a little bit more structured in terms of what I'm sharing, but at a later time, I'd be happy to address some further questions even through email. And yeah, we can actually go to the next slide, please. So, who is a refugee? Refugees are people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. It's important to, I think, I guess when I share stuff, it's more so from my perspective. It's not legal advice here today, but it's important to remember that when we are representing these people, whether we're helping them start their refugee process or write their narrative, I think sometimes we forget that at the end of the day, we're dealing with a person who's dealt with quite a lot. And we get more focused on completing deadlines or getting the work done. And we forget that, there's an individual or family before us. And I think it's important that we also take some time to make sure that this individual doesn't need further assistance, such as counseling, community resources that some of the organizations here today already provide, like Mosaic or Options. And I do think it's very important that we have some sort of checklist where we kind of just remember to ask them, like, do you need counseling? Do you need us to get you in touch with maybe even like getting some sort of food help or food stamps? Like there's local churches or temples that help as well. So I do think that we usually rush to just get the paperwork done because of how much we have to do in a day. But I think it's also important that we remember who we're working with and how much they've suffered and how much they've actually gone through. And so just some things I want to share today are just personal observations or things I've really thought about when I'm working as well, trying to get things done. So another thing is I want to share another important thing that we've encountered as lawyers is that we'll have some clients that unfortunately feel that it's best to just proceed with a refugee claim. However, when there's other options available, and the reason is some countries for refugee claims just do not, they're just in Canada, we do not consider claims from those countries, which is actually not the best option for the client. And so it's really important that when the client is seeking, either they're being self-represented or they're seeking a lawyer, that they're kind of getting the proper guidance right at the start before just going ahead and submitting a refugee claim. Because we'll get a lot of clients from Mexico, from India I've dealt with, which will say that, oh yeah, we've heard that we can just initiate a claim and we can become a PR. And sometimes there's not even enough grounds. So before we even get into it, it's important to understand that this person is actually someone that would be considered for the refugee process, because there are other applications such as the H&C applications. So sometimes I find I'm weighing myself, either it's a refugee claim or is it an H&C? And they're both very different applications, because in the refugee claims, you can focus more so on persecution, the risks, the dangers to this individual, whereas in H&Cs, we're looking at their establishments in Canada, how long have they been here, the best interest of their children, why should they be allowed to stay in Canada, versus hardships they're going to encounter if they're returned back to their country. And I'll get into that a little bit further. And another thing, sorry, I want to touch on was that sometimes it takes a long time to even start a refugee claim. And it's important that as soon as you're in touch with the client, to kind of start telling them, like, get the basic things together, such as just the IDs, a birth certificate from back home if they can. Sometimes they don't have the IDs or the birth certificate. That's a whole new issue. But also sometimes, for example, I always tell them that, anybody can write a story and say that, we've dealt with all of this so far in our life. But it's very important if you explain to them that, do you have any document evidence or even an affidavit or someone from back home that can send a sworn statement? So by the time it's time for their hearing or to provide the documentary evidence, they've already started gathering this for whoever's going to represent them. And it makes it easier, because sometimes there's a delay and then the hearing date's coming up, and it's very stressful too. So that's where a lot of community organizations can be very helpful, if you're guiding them from the get-go that, you're saying this happened to you. Okay, can you maybe get a death certificate from back home? Then they get it. But it's very rushed and it's stressful for the client and for the representative. And another thing I want to discuss actually about representing clients is, this is my personal observation. I'm seeing this a lot with consultants and agents and not lawyers, that where unfortunately clients are paying thousands and thousands of dollars, selling their land in their countries back home, just to come and make a fake refugee claim, because they're misguided and they're told that, oh, don't worry, you'll become a PR. So if that ever raises a red flag for anyone, it's important to kind of tell them that, first of all, it shouldn't be costing you 10, 15 plus grand to kind of initiate something, or they should be told that, how this process kind of works. Like, they will be assessed for credibility. Evidence will be required as well to a certain degree, because sometimes you have claims where they can't get any evidence. And then it seems like it's sometimes based on a lot on just a person's credibility at the hearing. So, and I've unfortunately also seen where it was a consultant in that situation where they were advised to take a fake picture or to create fake documents, and that's a real big problem, because as a lawyer we would have to withdraw from that file. But also they've started now this refugee process, they attend the hearing, then at the end they're going to get denied, and that's going to have a severe impact on their immigration. But yes, I know I got carried away because I had a lot to share, but I'm going to get into the next slide here. So who cannot make a refugee claim? So people with serious criminality, terrorists, human rights violators, someone who's going to be a security risk to the Canadian society, because obviously, I mean, these groups of individuals, you know, we wouldn't want Canadians to be at a risk. So these are some people that cannot make a refugee claim. Speaking of serious criminality, I have a case right now involving, unfortunately, it's a sexual assault situation, and sometimes the circumstances are such that where we obviously try to provide representation, and for certain immigration applications, you consider a different option. So this is somewhere where obviously, you know, you can't do a refugee claim, but maybe a different application because the individual might have a family here or little children. So that's where sometimes we consider doing H&C applications, which are very different from a refugee claim. So next slide is who is also not eligible. It's individuals that are recognized as a convention refugee by another country that they can return to. Obviously, the reason there is that you know, they've got this other safe place where they can be. And then I'm going to get into there's the safe third rule, which is between US and Canada borders, but I'm going to get into that a little bit later. They are not admissible to Canada on security grounds because of criminal activity. Once again, they've made a previous refugee claim that was not found to be eligible, or they've been rejected before by the IRB, or their claim has been abandoned, or a withdrawal of a previous refugee claim. So I will be discussing those further in detail as well when a claim is found to be abandoned versus where someone may want to withdraw a claim by, there's kind of a time when that can be done without that having negative consequences. So next is the IRB. So the IRB basically decides on whether the person is a convention refugee or a person in need of protection. And so a convention refugee is someone who is outside their home country or the country where they normally lived, but they're not able to return back to that country because they have a well-founded fear of persecution. That's the legal lingo, well-founded fear of persecution. And it's based on race, religion, political opinion, nationality, or being part of a social group, such as their gender or their sexual orientation. So basically, it's based on that the person has fear being persecuted against, and it could be one of these. It does not obviously have to be race, religion, political opinion, nationality, all of those. So one can be enough, but obviously there's other things that are looked at. I had a situation where someone was transgender. They were from Iran, and basically they're extremely persecuted. That group of individuals are. So then I had actually another situation based on religion, where it was for Iran, but the individual was converting from Islam to Christianity. And when you read up on how that's treated in Iran, it's very negative. It's harmful to individuals, and they are heavily persecuted against. So it's interesting because I mean, I don't know about the entire world. So when you're reading up on all these countries, you're learning a lot as well. And we live in a privileged society in Canada. So sometimes you'll be surprised to be like, oh, like in a different country, this is treated really extremely, or people are, you know, being treated in a very horrible manner. So that's where as advocates or lawyers or whoever is helping the individual, it doesn't hurt to do a really quick Google search to see that, learn a little bit more about the issue that the person is saying. Because sometimes even myself, I'll be honest, sometimes we start thinking like, oh yeah, is this really true? Are people really dealing with this? Is it really that bad? And when you read up on even the news articles, or other documents, it's actually shocking that it's really bad. People can lose their life over certain things. And then the second group is a person in need of protection. So a person is in need of protection is a person in Canada who can't return to their home country due to safety, obviously. This is because if they return, they may face danger of torture or risk to their life or risk of cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. So these are ors, it's not and, so it doesn't mean it's 1, 2, and 3, that all 3 elements are needed. It could be either one of the 3. So a danger of torture, risk to their life, or risk of cruel and unusual treatment. So, sometimes the fact that the person perceives that they are going to be at a risk, that can sometimes be enough, but obviously it's a case by case basis, what is actually happening, how real is the risk, right? So there's, because the member deciding, they're obviously going to have questions, but as long as the client's got some grounds or some information to kind of paint the picture and show what's happening there for the individual. And that's where, once again, evidence is important as well. So next slide. So who can make a claim? Obviously, the person needs to be in Canada, can't be, and they cannot be subject to a removal order. And so removal order, sometimes people get confused with, and I did too when I started, is that there's departure orders, deportation orders. So there's different kinds of exclusion orders, different kinds of removal orders. The term overall is removal order, and then you get all these different kinds. Each one has its own consequences. A departure order after a certain time can turn into a deportation order, which has a ban of, I believe, 5 years. So it's basically there's different kinds. So someone might be like, oh yeah, I have a deportation order, a departure order. Basically, they can't be subject to a removal order. So the other question is, can a person make a claim from outside of Canada? Some of you might be aware, we're seeing that with obviously such cases such as in Afghanistan as well. It's a bit complicated, I'm not going to get into that, but that's where they've started something with the United Nations Refugee Agency. So yes, you can make a claim from outside of Canada. There's kind of 2 ways. You can resettle in Canada as a refugee, or you can immigrate to Canada through a program. So some of you might have heard of things such as Group of 5 or a church sponsoring individuals. That's kind of through a group. Whereas, so if you're resettling into Canada as a refugee, the United Nations Refugee Agency is a designated organization. It's a referral organization, or it's a private sponsor group that can refer you. And you cannot apply directly, so it's kind of like a referral system. And in order to be referred, you must fall into one of the 2 refugee classes, so either a convention refugee abroad class or a country of asylum class. And those are obviously a lot. There's more information on those in further detail, but I'm not going to go into it for today. And then we have, as I talked about, the Group of 5 or church sponsors. So for immigrate to Canada through a program, you may be in this class if, for example, you're outside your home country or the country where you normally live, and you have been seriously affected by civil war or armed conflict, or you have been denied basic human rights on an ongoing basis. And So a country of asylum class refugees can be privately sponsored. You can also be in this class if you have the funds you need to support yourself and your family after you arrive in Canada. So there's like a financial aspect of this as well. You will still need the UNHCR, a referral organization, or a private sponsorship group to refer you. And I have actually seen a situation like that. I don't personally do these, but they're a lot more complicated. But it was actually a kid who had got a PR through one of these referral church organizations, and he got in trouble with a bad group of people here. He was going to lose his PR, but it was after kind of talking to the officer and negotiating, the officer agreed that this person be given another chance to remain here. And it's funny that as lawyers, we're trying to do the legal side of things, but I had a little chat with him too, and I told him that, you know, you're still young. You were basically taken away from refugee camps and given a chance to be in Canada, that, you know, you might want to do something positive with your life here. And it was nice seeing that someone's on a good path at this point. But it's interesting because sometimes I do find that certain clients or even refugees, they sometimes, at least the younger kids I'm finding, don't understand that it's kind of a privilege to be here. And sometimes as advocates or representatives, it's nice to share that information too, that there's other people that do get denied for their refugee claims. And if you do get approved, really use this time to settle down in a new place and make it the best situation for yourself or the family or the kids. And some of them, because they've seen so much in life, especially with this kid, he came from a camp and told me how horrible the conditions were, just how we see them in the movies. And he shared how he basically the kind of life he had there, he hadn't realized that he was kind of fortunate to be here, and he had seen a lot in life. And actually, as I talked to him, it felt like he was someone that needed counseling or that further support to kind of deal with the trauma he had suffered. So he was kind of reacting on that. So it's funny that as advocates or lawyers, sometimes we kind of play more than one hat, to where we kind of have to be mindful of, or kind of thinking like, why would this person kind of do certain things? And I think that's where it's great having some of the organizations that do exist in BC. But believe it or not, a lot of immigrants, refugees, they actually don't even know about the organizations. So I try to share that with them. And sometimes it's obviously helpful to put posters up, or even in libraries or public places, so that people know what they have available to them. So next thing is importance of the basis of claim. So the basis of claim is, I'm sure some of you are aware of, obviously it's a sworn document. It can be submitted through the Canadian Refugee Protection Portal. Before, you could just kind of fill it out, and it could be sent by mail, but now there's the online portal available as well. Whether it's easier or not, I can't say. Sometimes there's a lot of tech problems. I think I prefer sometimes the paperwork rather than the portals and online. So the claim can be how to initiate the claim. So first we'll get into that, is basically can be done at the inland offices, the port of entry. Port of entry, it can be made with CBSA when a person arrives at the land border, airport, or seaport. Point of entry officers are not allowed to send a person back if the refugee claim is made upon arrival. So a lot of clients I've had, they will actually have just made it right at the border right away. They will have submitted even a basis of claim or forms or documents, or they're given a deadline that, you have 15 days to get your basis of claim done. And so it's actually important that when we're meeting with our clients to find out how did they enter? Did they get any documents? Okay, you need to read those documents carefully. Was there a deadline provided to them by when the basis of claim needs to be submitted? Because that can cause a lot of problems if it's not done in a timely manner. And sometimes you're able to write and hopefully get an extension, obviously, but it's very important to be mindful of deadlines. And obviously, if you came to Canada through the USA, you may need to consider a safe third country agreement between US and Canada, and how the system kind of works. So a common exception is when someone has family residing in Canada. So it's important to keep in mind that you must have close relatives in Canada if you want to apply at the US-Canada land border. So the idea there is that the US is considered a safe place. So it's the idea is, well, why didn't you just make a claim there? Why did you have to come to Canada? And there's an exception of people sometimes have like family here, and that will be kind of a pretty important reason. Under the agreement, refugee claimants are required to request refugee protection in the first safe country they arrive in, unless they qualify for an exception. So that's what I'm talking about. It applies to refugee claimants who are seeking entry to Canada from the USA border, train, or at the airport. And sometimes, even when I've got further questions, I do find that the government websites are pretty decent on there's actually guides made for refugee claimants to follow, or kits as well, or even videos. And some of these documents are available in different languages. So I find that it's actually helpful to print it out or give it to the client in their own language. So that way they understand too that what are they applying for? What does this mean? What is a refugee claim? Because a lot of people come with misconceptions. And so that's always helpful. I was actually going to look into a little bit pertaining to the Canada-US Safe Third Country Agreement. And basically there are 4 types of exceptions. So if someone does pass through the US, there's the family member exception that we just talked about. And refugee claimants may qualify under the category of exception if they have a family member, but the family member needs to meet certain requirements. They are listed online, but I'll just quickly go through them. The person needs to be a Canadian citizen, a PR, or they can be PR of Canada, is a protected person under the Canadian immigration legislation, has made a claim for refugee status in Canada that has been accepted, has had his or her removal order stayed. They hold a valid Canadian work permit, they hold a valid study permit, or they are over 18 years of age and has a claim for refugee protection that has been referred to the IRB for determination. Sometimes there might be a minor, so there will be an exception for that. Refugee claimants may qualify under the exception if they are minors, so they're under the age of 18, who are not accompanied by their mother, father, or legal guardian, so they're basically on their own. They don't have a spouse or a common law partner, and they do not have a mother, a father, or a legal guardian in Canada or the USA. So that's another thing there. So now I'm going to get into the next slide, basis of claim. Basis of claim is pretty much the main document. It acts like a sworn statement. So whatever's in that document is pretty important. So it's important that when an organization or anyone is assisting a claimant with this document, that it's it's not rushed. It's properly completed, because what happens is, I find at least, the member during the hearing is pretty much comparing what the client is testifying. So if the document says on April 20th, 2000, this is something happened, then at the hearing, the claimant says, oh, it was April of 2020 when it happened. That can make a diff. It can actually, cause credibility concerns for the member, because they're going to think, well, this person doesn't even know their own story. Are they lying? And sometimes it can just be an honest mistake. But that's where it's very important to be mindful of what's written in the document. Sometimes to just get the deadline locked in, it'll say the document will just be kind of filled out, and it'll just say, please see attached or provided at a later time. I don't really recommend doing that, but if someone is in a position where they have to, they could write very minimal, but then provide a longer narrative after, which you're allowed to provide information. If anything, from what I know, it's 10 days before the hearing date is the last time you can do this, but whether the rules have recently changed, that's something I would double check. However, if, let's say, an error is made, it's actually, it can be corrected. So if someone did submit a basis of claim, it's signed by the claimant, it can be corrected, underlined, or highlighted, but it needs to be signed by the claimant and dated. So you can submit an updated basis of claim or with an addendum. So sometimes I'll get clients that already submitted something at the border. Of course, I'm not going to be satisfied with that, because the goal is that you write enough in the story with dates and names and places that when someone's reading the story, they don't have too many questions, because during the hearing, then all these questions are going to arise. So I try to do it as thorough as I can, and then we'll send an addendum signed by the claimant and dated. Sorry, I think there's maybe a question. Okay, so then there are, so basically each family member needs to submit their basis of claim. And obviously there's sometimes children. When it's a child that's from 0 to 6 years old, they only need to complete the portion where it says who you are. That's the only part that they need to complete, which is like the name, date of birth, stuff like that. But for children that are 7 to 17 years old, for their own basis of claim, all the questions need to be answered by the parent. So for 0 to 6 is just the very first part. And sometimes claimants will use an interpreter. And if they do, then there's, on the basis of claim, there's a page where it says declaration to be signed by an interpreter. That needs to be signed by an interpreter. And so the next thing I'm getting into is the next slide, which is claimants' requirements. And
there's a question in the Q&A with regards to the basis of claim deadline. It was extended to 45 days during COVID. Do you know whether or not this extension has been rescinded?
That is correct. It was actually extended. I don't know recently, because I have not recently, like in this month, done one. I did one prior to that, and it was extended at that time. But I always try and double check. Either I will call up RPD, or I'll write to RPD to confirm they do have emails available online, just because I'm always concerned about missing a deadline or having extra time. And sometimes clients will actually even have, they won't be sure, they will be confused themselves. So it is important that rather than, it's always important because of COVID to always check what's changing. We're having to do that as well all the time because 1 month there'll be something else and something else will be going on. So even I find sometimes even with federal court, like I've even called up for appeals. It's just important to always confirm. Okay, so getting into the claimants requirements, claims requirements. So we talked about some dangers they may face include torture, risk to their life, risk of cruel and unusual treatment or punishment. If you feel you could face one of these risks if you go back home to your home country or the country where you normally live, you may be able to seek refugee protection. So I kind of went into that already earlier. But it's interesting because a lot of the case law also talks about, it doesn't, I mean, I don't want to be generalizing here either, but it does not mean that there has to be for sure that this person is definitely gonna, you know, when they go home, like there's completely clear evidence. But the fact that if a person, there's somewhat of a feel that they are at risk of their life for cruel or unusual treatment, the case law that I've read at least, it does state that just having that mere risk is enough, that they're perceiving that there's a risk of it. So next slide is on credibility. That's what I was kind of getting into earlier. It's important that one, that the evidence that the claimant has provided, that they've reviewed it themselves, they understand why they've shared that document, and also where is that document really coming from, and is it a real document? Because believe it or not, the member is able to usually pick out or see some of those weaknesses in a case, and sometimes when it's not even clear to us, it might actually during the hearing come to be known that something isn't actually credible. And so the way I try to tell clients is that, you know, if they provided a basis of claim or a narrative or evidence, they obviously should know what that means or what their story is and what the dates are. It's not about just memorizing the evidence or nothing like that, but if they're saying something happened to them and these were the actual dates, the years, then during the hearing, it's important. Of course, people make mistakes, but it's important not to guess things. If someone can't remember, it's important just to be truthful about it and say that, you know, I think it was around this time, or I can't remember all the dates, because obviously you don't want to basically impact your credibility. Because as soon as credibility is an issue, it's pretty difficult for the claim to be successful. And that's why, you know, knowing the basis of claim, the dates, the evidence, very important. So two pieces of evidence that are needed in a claim is objective evidence and subjective evidence. So objective is kind of the country conditions, what's going on in that country, like how we talked about Iran. And there's a national documentation package. When you Google national documentation package, for every country, the IRB has these documents, and they're based on the country. There's a lot. Like you can pull up any country, you can read about the economy, stuff to do with gender, stuff to do with finances, violence, the authorities, basically everything, all the issues. And it's the claimant's job, or obviously the representative, to go through these documents and to provide that what are you relying on for your claim. And you have to provide objective documents. I had one claim can't remember now what country it was, but there was no documents on that country, no national documentation package. And so I had to be creative, and I had to find articles on Google, or go as far as having the client find articles within that country back home from newspapers, and then have them translated here to show that, you know, whatever's happening to him is actually in the news back home. So that's another thing where organizations can assist a client too. If even the client knows of certain newspapers that are always available and read there, sometimes it's better to also attach that evidence, and they can get that beforehand, even have it translated. So it just speeds things up. So that's for the objective side of things. And then for subjective, you get, for example, affidavit, letters, witnesses. A witness can appear at the hearing, but that can be good or bad. Sometimes it's helpful, but sometimes it isn't. I had a claim where there were two brothers. Basically, it didn't go well. The claimant was doing a decent job, but I believe the brother was a bit nervous. So whatever the brother was testifying to, or kind of, I guess, made the other brother look slightly not as credible. So it's something you kind of have to assess. And sometimes when you're preparing them initially, like for their claim, it seems like they'll do well, or it'll be good to have that witness, but it does kind of complicate it too when there's two individuals providing evidence, because if they're not on the same page, then it can kind of create problems. So sometimes you have to assess it, but once it was actually beneficial to have a mother and a daughter, where the daughter was just providing further evidence or support to support the claim. And I think that's usually always difficult to assess that. And I see someone shared the link there. Yes, it's definitely very, very helpful for the national documentation package, because as I said, sometimes we're not aware of what the client's going through, or what they've shared is persecution. And then when you research the country, you get a better understanding. You're like, oh yeah, that definitely is considered persecution. It was actually in one of these documents as well. I myself found supporting documents based on an issue where the court had already decided in a claim that if a person could not get any form of work back home because they're being discriminated against, well, how are they going to live and support themselves? And that was a form of persecution, because they couldn't get any kind of job back home. And we have heard of that, but sometimes it's nice to have, obviously, a document that you can point the member to, and direct their attention that, you know, this kind of decision has been made in the past. So next I'm going to look at, along with the claim, you can actually have work permits. And sorry, I think someone asked what country did not have a national documentation package. It's funny, I can't remember what country it was. I will have to look at that, but it was very difficult because there was no document on that country. I had a very difficult time, and I had to actually rely on research and actually getting documents from that country. I wish I remembered, but I've done a few now, so I forgot which client it was. So for work permits, as part of a refugee claim, I actually also find that sometimes clients will want to make a claim, not because they're being persecuted against, but just because they've heard that you can get a work permit to work. And but then also, and then you get real refugee claimants that don't even know that they can have a work permit and start supporting themselves, so they don't have to rely on the organizations as much. So you can get a work permit if you make your claim at the port of entry. You can request to apply for a work permit with your with the border services officer. You won't get your work permit right away until like the medical exam's done. If you submit your refugee claim online, there's usually a spot there where you want to make sure you tick it off that you are applying for a work permit as well. And unfortunately, though, some claims, it's like many months until they even get a work permit, because there's such a backlog right now that the eligibility hearings aren't even happening, or sorry, the eligibility interviews. And until that doesn't even happen, they don't get a work permit. So they're left in a pretty hard situation with no money or access to funds. And unfortunately, I mean, we can't do much for that, because until that next step doesn't happen, they're just not able to. So I guess that's where also it's helpful if organizations are kind of aware of where they are in the refugee claim and what other resources these claimants can have access to. Because sometimes you'll have little children and there's no one working in the family. Well, how do they get food or buy on a daily basis? So it's difficult for sure. And it's always important that once they've had the eligibility interview too, that they make sure that they get their work permit too, so they can actually start working. And sometimes the hearing doesn't even happen for a couple of years. And that's a long time for someone to work and make a living. And sometimes, unfortunately, they have to go back. So if they've had the chance to kind of work during that time, it's pretty beneficial to the family, because they uprooted and left at one point, and then to return, at least they have funds. So some people ask, can they get a study permit? It's something that has to be requested separately and applied for, and so it is possible. There's a gray area also when someone gets denied for a refugee claim. Well, now they still have, even though their refugee claimant document will say, like, let's say the hearing was in 2023 and then the document goes until 2024, or even the work permit. Well, some people are like, well, no, even though they got denied at the hearing, they assume that they still have status in Canada. The reality is they don't. Once the decision is made at the hearing, it's done. Even though their document might read that, and the removal order is enforceable as soon as they've been refused. And so basically there's a gray area, because people will have a valid work permit that will say until 2024. Can't really advise on that legally, but we find that people will still be able to get work. They continue working, even though, because the document still has, 2024 on it. Realistically, legally speaking, they are out of status, but people think that they have still a work permit status and that they're okay working. And I can't advise clients on that ever, but we see that a lot. They will continue. Okay, so next slide is I guess, at this point, if we want, does anyone have any questions? I'm just reading these other ones.
There are a couple which I think you're reading right now.
Yeah. Okay, so the place can vary, obviously, for the eligibility interview. I had someone that went downtown recently. It's very important. You cannot miss these. If they are missed for some reason, you need to make sure it gets rescheduled. Obviously, you can ask to have it rescheduled. because actually, believe it or not, the online portal is not easy to work with. For some reason, sometimes it doesn't even provide a notification that you have a document that came up or emailed for an eligibility interview. And I'll be honest, I missed it once because I got no email. How do you keep tabs on so many portals? I didn't get a notification, and I believe you're supposed to. So sometimes there could be glitches too. So of course the client almost missed their eligibility interview, but you're able to reschedule them. Of course, it's not good that this happens, but it's important to, I guess, unfortunately, you have to have tabs on the portal because I don't know why, but it did not send an update. And you do not want to miss these because the assumption is that obviously if you don't show up that you've abandoned your claim, and that's definitely not good because it just means that you're done. Like at that point you've abandoned it. And so sorry, I'm looking at the second question. I think she's talking.
That question was about the story you were sharing earlier about the fellow with the refugee status who got in trouble with the law and had the potential of losing his PR.
Oh, yes.
status.
For him, he's a kid. He basically had, I think, commit robbery or something along those lines. It was pretty serious, but I hate to say it, he got a little lucky as well because he was from a particular country where once you leave as well, he had no right of access to get back in. So realistically, there was no place to send him back as well. So it was a tricky situation. He lucked out, but also the officer was nice as well. They were kind of willing to give this person an opportunity to remain in Canada. Yeah, so that was the first one. So I have a question here. I've had many refugee claimants that have come in via US-Canada border, and most have received the refugee claimant document. Why is that so? Or why is that so? Well, sometimes I've had that too, that you have, there's an exception, which is you have family here. So I had a person who had a sister here. They came from the US, they were allowed to stay. They were allowed to do their refugee claim here because of that exception. They had someone who was a PR or a Canadian citizen who was family to them, and they were allowed. And the family actually is defined as, it includes a spouse, a legal guardian, a child, a father or mother, a sister or brother, grandfather or grandmother, a grandchild, an uncle or an aunt, a nephew or a niece, a common law partner, or a same-sex spouse. So speaking about criminality and H&C, so someone is asking here, you mentioned that a person that was ineligible for refugee status due to criminality could apply for H&C. Are criminality rules less strict for H&C applicants? That's not really. So the way it is the officer has discretion. It's really up to the officer whether they're going to grant the H&C or not. So basically in the H&C, there's many factors on which you can argue a case or provide evidence on. So sometimes, there's many things. The main 5 things I like to focus on: how established is the person? Are there children involved? That, for example, the person that's a criminal, maybe he has a wife here. Maybe he's got a newborn baby and 2 other kids here. Yes, they commit this crime and they're sitting in jail here in Canada, but can we paint a picture for immigration to show, well, there is, this person has this negative history, but if he's sent back now, there's going to be hardships for this person to be sent back home. And on top of that, he's got a wife and kids here. However, sometimes I've tried to fight a lot of cases, even in federal court recently, and sometimes it's not enough if someone has real children, a Canadian spouse here in Canada, their application will still get refused. So whether you do refugee or H&C for someone, it doesn't mean one's going to be more guaranteed. It just refugee files are more so focused on someone having persecution based on those 5 things we talked about, or the if it's a convention refugee or a protected person. And if you feel like the situation doesn't even meet the requirements of the refugee, then you know you have to look at a different kind of application. So it's something you kind of have to assess. Okay, so that was that question. Then we have another one here. Okay, also I'd like to say I do a lot of legal aid cases. So yes, refugee and agencies can be done on legal aid basis. Obviously, legal aid decides if someone is eligible based on their income or the funds that they have available. And sometimes clients do get denied, obviously, and sometimes they obviously get approved. Legal aid lawyers do work permit applications. Unfortunately, legal aid, it doesn't hurt to write to legal aid, but I'm fine that no, they're not covered. And it's also seems like legal aid definitely provides coverage for refugee claims all the way up until the hearing gets done. And then they provide coverage for H&Cs. And then if an H&C gets refused, then for going to federal court, because I do a lot of H&Cs and federal court work. That's something I guess to be discussed. If someone, for example, is a family violence victim, which I represent a lot as well, they are sometimes need a work permit. In those cases, I've had sometimes legal aid will provide coverage. Someone arrived in a claim there. Okay, so if someone arrived in another province and they started their claim there and then moved to BC, what do they need to do now that they are here in BC? I've had that. I've had someone reach out to me from Toronto. They moved here. And basically at that time, you can write to the RPD. You need to do a change of location and provide the address and updates. And as immigrants, they're always required to update their address. So if they moved, they should, even before they move, they should provide that information that they're moving on this date to this new address. That's actually the applicant's responsibility because immigration is always looking for ways to refuse clients or claimants or applicants. So sometimes it could happen that if someone didn't provide an updated address, well, they'll assume that it was a misrepresentation or they lied about where they were living. So, I always tell my clients when I submit something, it's your responsibility to tell me that you've moved or that your contact number changed because we need to update immigration. So another question we have here. Can a refugee submit a sponsorship at the same time? I guess I'm not completely understanding that question, so I'm going to skip over it and get back into the slides. Okay, so withdrawing a claim. So as we were talking about H&C versus refugee claims, it's very difficult, unfortunately, my job is to give a client their options. Sometimes I give them the option that you need to withdraw your refugee claim and consider a different avenue because it makes no sense that you made a refugee claim in the first place. They don't like to hear that. They already come with the understanding sometimes from either their friends or countries or people from back home or just local communities that, do a refugee claim, you'll definitely get status in Canada and it'll be all good. And unfortunately, it's not the best decision. And when you tell them that, it's usually, I find it's a battle, but at the end of the day, it's their instructions, and that's how we have to proceed. By the consequences are not good, because once they get refused for their refugee claim, the removal order kicks in. So at that point, they're done with their status while they're here. So the rule is that someone can withdraw a refugee claim, and they need to complete and sign the withdrawal of a claim for refugee protection prior to it getting referred to the RPD. And so obviously before like the hearing happens, it's very important that the withdrawal happens before it goes to a hearing and sufficient evidence has been heard, because if it's been withdrawn before the hearing happens, then it's kind of like that they never did this refugee claim. If they end up doing this after the evidence has been heard, they withdraw it. At that point, it doesn't matter. The removal order will kick in, and they're removable. And then there's the other thing about abandoning a claim. So if you don't, for example, complete the basis of claim on time, or you do an interview, before declaring it abandoned, RPD will hold a special hearing no later than 5 working days. At this hearing, you will have to explain why you could not provide a completed basis of claim form, or maybe why you missed something on time, and why the claim should continue. So once again, you don't want an abandoned claim. That's not also good either. So, but before it's considered abandoned, there is a hearing which happens. And if, I guess, for some reason, let's say a person really did miss a basis of claim or something happened, a person can explain themselves by, I mean, it's up to the member at that point too, what's going to happen. And the main thing is a refused refugee claim is obviously not the best. Next slide is on flight alternative and results. So obviously, if you get approved, well, that's great. You're going to get, you can apply for PR. But one thing is, I actually had someone call, actually happened more than once, so that's why I'm sharing it. People think that basically they can go back after they're like, oh yeah, I'm a refugee, I got PR now, I can go back to my country, visit my family. That's not really true, because they claimed persecution from that country, that there's danger back home. So now it's not like you can go on a vacation there. And someone actually did that, and I don't know what actually ended up happening to them, but basically they were being contacted by CBSA at that point. Most likely they would have lost their PR. Whether that happened or not, I don't know what their reason was for returning or how this officer reacted to it. But it doesn't mean that just because, okay, now you've got PR, that you're golden and you're good. That now you can go back home and visit your family or friends. It's obviously refugee claims. They're very serious circumstances. They're based on persecution or safety or danger back home. So it's not something that you can just kind of return back to, because you're saying that as a part of the claim, there's also IFA, which is where it's an important factor that the court looks at. That's why I was going to talk briefly about it. It's the internal flight alternative, and that's basically the person is actually that's making the claim. They're saying that nowhere in this country can I safely live. And that's a pretty interesting argument, because sometimes there's other cities or towns a person can relocate. But for example, with my Iran situation, the clients that had converted to Christianity, well, anywhere they went in Iran, they did not have an IFA, because they couldn't live anywhere safely and without persecution. So sometimes a claimant's claim will be found to be credible, and they will be believable that what they're saying happened to them is actually truthful, but the result will actually be that the member decides, and I've read that, where they'll say that, oh, you know, you can live in this other town called Mombasa, and you know, you'll be safe there. And I had that for one of my clients from Kenya, where it was the person was completely credible, they believed the story. But they said that, you know what, you can still live in this one particular town safely, and that, sorry, we're denying your claim. Next slide is on, so what do you do once you've been refused? So basically, there is the RAD, which is the Refugee Appeal Division. So first, you may be able to appeal to the Refugee Appeal Division at the IRB. You must file a notice of appeal with RAD within 15 days of receiving your refugee refusal. Once again, deadline and dates, 15 days. So it's a quick turnaround. You have 30 days from receiving your refugee refusal to explain to RAD why the refusal is wrong. So this is pretty much done in written arguments and to explain. So basically, it's a chance for claimants to prove that the RPD's decision was wrong in fact, or the law, or even both. And it lets new evidence to be introduced that was not reasonably available at the time. So it's not like you can just put in all this new evidence, but if for some reason there wasn't something that was really important. Oral hearings are not really conducted. It's an exception, if anything. So it is all through writing. So it is obviously pretty serious work. And sometimes I find that claimants just want to exercise that appeal option, but it's really not in their best interest, because it's just costing money and time. And sometimes when you read the decision and you look at it, and it sometimes does feel that unfortunately what's decided is quite reasonable. And that's obviously a very difficult conversation to have with the client, because they're obviously under the assumption that, you know, you've got to fight for me and keep me here, right? And the thing is, you can only fight what's before you. And it's sometimes, of course, there's wrong decisions. And of course, you want to argue those and make sure you don't miss the deadline. Sometimes they are very unreasonable. So it depends, but it's easier to tell a client that, you know what, we're going to take this to the next level and try to appeal it. Whereas appeal where you don't want to proceed and actually tell the client it's going to save them money or the legal resources of even organizations such as legal aid, because as you know, it's they're fortunate to have the support of various organizations, but obviously it's important to make sure that as advocates too, that we're aware of which clients really require those resources, and they're not just being exhausted for absolutely no reason. Next, we'll look at some examples of failed refugee claimants who are not eligible to appeal to the RAD. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but for example, number 2, those with claims with no credible basis. So already their credibility is an issue, and that already the member doesn't believe their claim or what they're saying. Number 3, claimants who are subject to an exception to the Safe Third Country Agreement. So as we talked about the Safe Third Agreement earlier. Then there's another one, individuals who withdrew or abandoned their refugee claim. So that's why Withdrawing obviously makes sense. It's a kind of a personal choice you made to withdraw it. Now you can't go appeal it. Like, that's a decision you took. But then abandoning the claim, so that's what's important to be aware of. Any deadlines, eligibility, basis of claim, because if you miss that, then you can't even appeal it. It's kind of game over at that time. And then all failed claimants can still ask federal court to review a negative decision. So after this, if it's still a negative decision, then you can go to federal court for a judicial review. And I do a lot of the federal court matters. But once again, it's very important because you can have agents, you can have self-reps, you can have non-lawyers go all the way to through the refugee process. But for federal court, only lawyers are allowed to do the federal court process in that arena. So the biggest struggle there is sometimes when the client wasn't ours from the beginning, in federal court, we're not allowed to put in any new evidence that should have already been in the application. So whatever was already in the basis of claim, whatever happened at the hearing, all of that is all we can argue to say whether if it was an unreasonable decision. So if something very important got missed out because whoever was representing them rushed it or wasn't careful and it was important, then in federal court, we're not allowed to put new evidence in. I have done that for clients for other kinds of applications because I get, I want to help my clients out, but we're not allowed. There's case law I found because I just had to get this. The client never put something in which was very important, and then I just wanted to make sure the court had it. I found case law to back it up, which suggested that if it's just to kind of provide clarity for the court, it won't be considered extrinsic evidence, so it was allowed in. And I was able to get that letter in. And the judge actually said that, this isn't really new evidence. It's actually based on that case law, it's allowed to be in. So we were able to get that in, but I mean, it's very important that from the beginning that the applications are properly, the claims are done properly. And it's also important to remember that that there's also deadlines for federal court. So if it's a decision from inside Canada, usually it's 15 days to start the process. If it's from outside of Canada, it's I believe 60 days. And so the deadlines are pretty quick. You obviously, if the 15 days are missed, you can try and make an application to the court and ask for an extension, but that's a process of its own. And obviously, there has to be an explanation that why that deadline was missed. And I will briefly talk about legal aid coverage. That is something, obviously, if you get someone, they need a refugee claim or an H&C, they need to apply to legal aid to see if they will get coverage. And I find that most refugees tend to get it, but when I have H&C clients, a lot of them do as well. But obviously legal aid will look at the resources and funds available to them. And it's better to get those applications put in as soon as possible. Even if an organization is referring that client out to a lawyer, it's very helpful for an organization to already get them started on the legal aid process, because I find that legal aid is really busy too. Sometimes it can take them a week or two to sometimes get back. And then if you have obviously someone who needs to get the basis of claim done quickly, I mean, legal aid's really helpful too if you're in touch with someone, but like it's important that especially if someone has a 15-day deadline, you might want to just pick up the phone and try to get someone on the call and set that up for the claimant. And so legal aid does provide coverage for a refugee claimant or other immigrants to be represented by lawyers. So sometimes clients cannot afford a private lawyer because it's quite expensive. So the only resource they really have is legal aid support. And legal aid has been pretty decent in terms of how much prep time we need for preparing them for the hearing, attending the hearing. Yeah, but there's obviously a lot of resources on the legal aid website as well, which has newly been revamped as well. And that's actually pretty much my presentation on the world of refugee claimants. There's probably a lot of questions or other information that I wasn't able to get into, but that's kind of what I had prepared for today, and I really hope it was helpful.
Yeah, there is one question for you in the Q&A. So you want me to say the question?
It's okay. I'm going to have a quick read. I guess I'm not exactly understanding this question, but yes, when looking at IFA, obviously, so first of all, they're looking at a person's credibility, right? And so I had that one case where credibility was not a problem at all. And then when looking at IFA, whether the person could go live somewhere else in a different town, of course, they were looking at, okay, well, can that person make a living there? Can they be safe as well? So you can't just, the board can't just, at least I haven't seen it where they've just suggested that, oh, okay, it's safe for you, we're going to just go to that town. But then if they don't have a meaningful way to earn there, of course, then that's not a proper place, right? So that's why during the hearing, we're always trying to think about everything, and if that's where we would probably get into asking our client more questions about, well, how would it be for you to live there, even about work as well. So you got to paint kind of the full picture for the member as well. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
There's another question. No, that's just a comment.
But other than that, I mean, one thing, it's funny, I've shared this even on other presentations, is basically a big concern that I'm seeing, and I'm more of a new lawyer, and some lawyers have already been advocating for this for a while, is that you get, unfortunately, people from various countries do not know, I'm not saying advocates or consultants are bad or inferior, but unfortunately, they tend to believe that a consultant and an immigration lawyer is exactly the same. And they're used to, for example, in India, because I've seen a lot of clients where somebody will pay someone almost like 20, 30, 40,000 Canadian just to get a LMIA, like a job offer and a work permit, for example, to work in Canada. Or they will be told that, oh, we'll start a refugee claim for you. Don't worry, you'll become a refugee and you'll get a permanent residence. So these refugees are paying thousands and thousands of dollars, and then they're stuck because really, did they have a refugee claim? They didn't. And so I would suggest that if organizations ever have internal presentations, even for refugees, it's important to advise them, because sometimes they're so desperate or vulnerable that they will go running to agents or people that don't have such a high duty to the law, and they will end up exhausting either a property back home or their funds that they have, and then they will unfortunately have paid thousands, and when they really didn't even have a refugee claim. And then when they get denied, then we get people calling us and they'll be in tears. And honestly, we cannot do much if your immigration history's already been jeopardized. That's something we cannot change. So I usually try to tell people I'm not looking down on advocates or consultants, but there's so many agents and consultants that are taking advantage of these people in China and India, even within those countries, and not even here in Canada. So they already paid someone abroad or paid someone connected to them here, and they lost everything they had. I'm also duty counsel, and so I see a lot of people that get detained. So on the weekend, when we're having fun, people are crossing the border, walking in, and then they're stuck in detention centers, and then you hear their stories, and then they'll ask you about making a refugee claim, because that's the only thing they've ever been taught to do, that will just cross over and make a refugee claim. Some of them are legitimate, like even how there's, I think, the family that passed away while crossing with kids. And so they risk everything. They listen to someone out there, someone here, and they actually don't even know that their chances are none. So it's important too that I know there's a lot of great organizations here today that everyone does their part in educating people too, that go ahead, look up the lawyer that you think it is a lawyer, or if you think it's a consultant, look them up, because some of even the consultants are actually not registered with the ICCRC. And then lawyers that are saying that they're a lawyer, they're not registered with the Law Society of BC. So if someone's telling you they're a lawyer or or a consultant, you're able to look them up. And I think even if like it's an organization that's just helping with food stamps, or like I'm just trying to think, sometimes you're not even helping with immigration, or maybe even just with English classes. It's important to have these little talks and tell them that, be mindful of people that might come and try and take advantage of you, because we're seeing that a lot. It's not even on a minor basis. It's thousands and thousands of dollars being taken away from them. And then they have absolutely nothing left. They have no immigration left in Canada, and they have no home to return to. And imagine going back, for example, to India, where your dollar is so much smaller, and you can't even afford a living then once you go back, or you can't just afford the similar lifestyle that you now have developed in Canada, and now you got removed, or even China or the Philippines. I see a lot of those clients. So yeah, I mean, I shared a lot. I shared a lot of negative and positives. I hope it was helpful. Yeah, and if anyone ever needs any help, there are a few legal aid lawyers, so feel free to reach out to them. Our firm also does it too, but there's a lot of good lawyers out there too that are helping with legal aid work. So yeah, thanks Baljinder and Sarah and Melissa.
Thank you, Prabh. I'm sure I've missed a lot of your presentation today, but I'm sure every participant have gained a lot out of it. It's a lot of information, a lot of confusing information too. And I second your comment on how people are selling LMIAs and how this system is, working, resolving these issues, and they are in the mess. after getting these LMIAs and not, gaining whatever they need to gain out of it. And I think there is a lot of work need to be done in this area. I personally see many, many files and many people talking about it, but I have no solution to offer, and I have no solution, nowhere to refer it out to them. I just feel sad when I look at this. But I do say that, as you said, that do not trust many of the immigration consultants until you know that they are registered with the regulatory body, because many of them are not.
Yeah, and I think that's where whoever was present here today, or if there are any organizations, it's important to create awareness that they need to kind of really look into who are they paying their money to be represented and not to be misled.
Any other questions? Please feel free to ask Prabh at this time before she goes away. And we are planning to do another session which will focus more on Ukrainian and Iranian refugees, and more about legal aid's help on Ukrainian and Iranian refugees, and also Prabh's experience on the new Ukrainian-Iranian applications. We will keep you posted on this session as Prabh will be ready in the coming month or so. I must say that in August or in September, we will run this session along with the legal aid staff so that they can answer all the questions along with Prabh. And if at this point, if you have any questions, we are open for another minute or so. Please feel free to ask Prabh. I think people are good. And thank you so much, Prabh. That was a lot of information. And thank you for
thank you for having me. Take care. Okay, bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.